Now, I wanted to ask about removing the requirement for student pilot licence and pilot proficiency checks in certain circumstances. Could you explain what that means in English?
I'd like to call Mr Crosswaith, who was integral in developing this rule.
Dr Crosswaith, I'm the Manager of Flight Crew Licensing Standards at CASA. So in the context of the student pilot licence...
And this is definitely part of the savings measures?
Yes.
Right.
So in the past we have received notifications and applications from student pilots, and the use of that information was quite limited. Student pilots are managed under flying schools and instructors, and so we saw an opportunity to remove the student pilot licence from those licensing regulations.
So you're not
with an administrative saving and no cost or adverse effect to safety.
So you're no longer monitoring student pilots?
Now we still receive information through their medical certificates, and the flying schools keep records of those student pilots.
So what was the information that you were receiving?
Just that they were really notified that they were student pilots.
So how do you keep track of them if you don't know who they are?
Well, we keep
or you just now, because you get a medical certificate, oh, he must be a student pilot, or she must be a student pilot?
Well, there's very limited use of that information, if any.
No, that's not what I asked. I said, how do you know that there's student pilots out there being trained if you don't receive any information about them?
If we need to know information about a student pilot, then we be able to gain that.
That's the catch-22. How do you know you need to know something when you don't know they're there?
Well, we don't believe there's a need to know.
You don't think there's a need to know how many there are, or who they are, or where they're operating from?
Not particularly, no, Senator.
Okay.
Senator, the use of a student pilot's licence, and I'll ask Mr Crosswaith to correct me if I'm wrong, has to some extent been an Australian choice. It is not required in the ICAO framework.
Yeah, no, that would be why we have less crashes and the safest skies in the world, because we don't just follow absolutely the international standards, because they haven't been as successful as they could be. So it's when you start watering them down that we begin to scratch our head.
The fact that somebody has a piece of paper that allows them to do this as a student does not at all influence these training standards or the syllabus.
But you no longer will have a readily handy list at all of student pilots?
Only through the medical requirements.
And if they don't have any medical requirements, I mean, I don't know.
They've got to have a
so
medical.
If they have, they must submit a medical certificate?
They must have a medical certificate to fly.
So you keep your record will be their medical record only, but that will give what their name and address, I presume, and where they're flying, and who their instructors are, and
the records, the training records, will be kept in each flying training establishment.
But the only way you'll know a student pilot exists is from their medical record now, instead of an alternate database that you had previously.
Correct, Senator. And the information that we used to keep with student pilot licence holders, that didn't include the flying school.
So what's the saving?
The administrative cost for CASA to administer the licence.
How much?
Well, the licence itself used to be $50.
Right, Senator Forsyth, are you ready to go? Senator Conroy?
No, if I can just clarify with Mr Boyd. So where it says the savings are listed below, amending CASA Part 21 to expand the list of recognised countries for the purpose of mutual recognition in relation to airworthiness, engineering and airworthiness approvals. Even though it's listed here, as a saving. You're saying, no, it's not.
The majority of the saving came from the provisions.
Yeah, no, the majority of the saving, but so some saving came from
Some,
this.
but in proportion, very little. Senator.
But you've listed it here. And there's 5 countries, I understand?
Yes, Senator.
And do you remember off the top of your head which ones they were? They were read out earlier today, I think, by Mr Murdoch. I won't ask him to try and remember it, but if he can, that's great. I can't. Brazil was one. Thank you. Senator Bullock remembers Brazil. Does that sound right?
Yes, Senator. But I'm sure Mr Ward would be able to read the others.
Mr Ward,
Senator,
you've been remaining silent while we've all been scratching our heads. Help us out.
the list of countries that I think you're referring to, Senator, is China, Korea, Brazil, Singapore, and I think... I can't remember the 5th one, I'm sorry, Senator, off the top of my head.
Did we finish, Senator Conroy?
Thank you. Senator Fawcett.
Whether that was North or South Korea wasn't clear. Senator Fawcett.
Mr Farquharson, Part 61 introduces a whole bunch of requirements for rating renewals, flight test proficiency checks. Some pilots have up to 20 or more different things that will need to be checked. Have you done any modelling as to the number of testing officers, whatever you call them, that will be required, and do you have sufficient to service the needs of industry?
I'm not aware of as to whether we have done any modelling, Senator, but we have retained the ATO conditions, and we are finding that people are taking up the ability to move to flight test examiner, which facilitates that their ongoing functioning within that Part 61 environment.
So when you say you retain conditions, does that mean they have indemnity from CASA?
ATOs remain, while they remain ATOs, they retain indemnity.
Including when they become a flight test examiner?
Not in respect of a flight test examiner, no, Senator.
So you're telling me that you're encouraging people to move from ATO to be a flight test examiner to work under Part 61, but that they don't have compliant indemnity cover, and yet that's the workforce you're relying on to actually cover off all these type ratings and proficiency tests?
There is, and we have made it clear to the industry that there are a number of insurance companies who will provide personal indemnity insurance. To my knowledge, people who are moving into the flight test examiner regime are not concerned that they have to purchase their own personal indemnity insurance.
Mr Farquharson, all those costs flow into the industry, and it's only a couple of years ago that a fuel excise increase was levied. Can we keep the noise down, please, because the witness can't actually even hear the question? A fuel levy was indexed on the industry to pay for, amongst other things, increased staff at CASA. And yet when I look at the changes in staff categories from 2010 to 2013, I see that your corporate services is now 441, which is an increase of 91, but your flying operations inspectors are down to 70, which is a decrease of 15. So you're levying industry for supposed safety outcomes, and yet it's your corporate services area that is growing, not your flying operations inspectors. So in net terms, have you done modelling to ascertain that you will have sufficient people to do the testing that Part 61 requires without an undue cost on industry?
Not to my knowledge, Senator.
And is that a satisfactory condition, given that Part 61 is now going to influence the operations of the entire aviation industry? To not know if you're going to have enough examiners to meet the legal requirements?
Senator, the indications that we're seeing from the people uptaking the transition is that there will be, and we are facilitating people to move into that environment.
So you're hoping that there'll be enough people. You haven't actually done any modelling to give yourself some comfort before designing the whole Part 61 that you would have enough workforce to do this crucial function.
With that answer, So we're talking about the flight reviews, flight tests and proficiency checks for industry pilots.
Yep.
So a couple of points there. The first one is that, as Acting Director said, that the industry ATOs, or approved testing officers, have continued. We have provided opportunities for concurrent flight review and proficiency checks, and also in the latest amendment to the regulations before they commenced on the 1st of September, we've reduced the number of checks required, for example, for instructors and examiners. And also we have a mechanism within the regulations that allows CASA to grant an approval to conduct proficiency checks and flight tests. And the examples of those where in the transition period, the 4-year transition period, we're able to manage the flow or the demand of flight examiners.
So who the flight examiners are up to it, and who tests the testers?
So the testers are tested through our system or through people that CASA requests in industry to test those people.